So it is maybe the turning point in the history of modern American animation that The Prince of Egypt, the 1998 DreamWorks animated film about Moses, was not a bigger hit. It was a huge, very expensive hand-drawn animated film. And in some ways, the future of the movie studio DreamWorks Animation depended on it, or at least the future of hand-drawn animation depended on it. Had it been a bigger hit, I think the industry in America would not have gone down the path of CGI like it ended up happening. I've always been aware of this movie as a sort of footnote in the industry and like a cog in the greater battle between Disney and DreamWorks of the time. But I'd never actually been very curious about the movie itself. Like, is it a good movie? But that's my mistake, because I finally watched it and it turns out it's a masterpiece. Like, who knew? I'm serious. It could be the height of American hand-drawn animation. There is no other movie that looks like this, that feels like this. There's no other movie like this. And something like this ambitious, was never attempted again. The closest that Disney came, I think, would have been The Hunchback of Notre Dame in terms of this kind of animation, but also the serious story. But even that movie has like wacky sidekicks and more fun songs. Anyway, we'll get to that. Some history first. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I've talked about many times as I make these history videos, he ran Disney's movie studios from 1984 to 1994, and then he left to form DreamWorks alongside Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. And among their plans was an animation studio to rival Disney's, which at the time was at the height of its powers of the Disney Renaissance. And at the very beginning of DreamWorks, the very beginning planning stages, the three of these guys sat around and had like pitch meetings with each other. And apparently it was Steven Spielberg who had the idea to do an animated version of the Ten Commandments. And apparently his two partners looked at him a little askance, thought that doesn't seem like a very commercial idea. But the entire history of DreamWorks was people just saying, yes, Steven, good idea. What Steven Spielberg wanted, Steven Spielberg would get. But Katzenberg, who was in charge of the animation studio, he grew to be really attached to the story, and he got extremely involved with the production, way more than a typical studio exec would be in an animated movie. So the story that the movie tells is Moses growing up as the adopted brother of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses, or as they say in the movie, Ramesses. And then he leaves his adopted family to lead his people out of the clutches of the pharaoh and into the promised land. And you know, you can think about this for 2 seconds and realize no wonder Katzenberg was so invested in this story. This is literally his story vis-a-vis Disney and DreamWorks. So like when DreamWorks Animation was staffing up, he basically raided Disney's animation studios, went and got animators up and down the line at all levels, promised them bigger budgets and more autonomy to come work for DreamWorks. And there was a exodus of animators from Disney to DreamWorks. Meanwhile, lots of animators stayed at Disney and got paid a lot better. This was a boon for animators in terms of getting paid. Katzenberg made a point of positioning The Prince of Egypt as the anti-Disney movie. And it's funny that Shrek, a few years later, its reputation would be this is the anti-Disney movie, and that it works that into the text of the movie itself. The Prince of Egypt, it's more of a stylistic thing. The animation style and the story itself. The story is way more grounded, more mature, more contemplative, darker, moves slower, more serene. In terms of the animation, the character animation is way more realistic than Disney, but then the greater animation is allowed to be way more expressionistic, surreal than Disney got at the time, or really has ever gotten. Again, there's really nothing like this movie. It is gorgeous. It is a gorgeous movie to look at. Brenda Chapman, Steve Hickner, and Simon Wells are the directors. They and their team did an incredible job. There are like 10 times in my notes where I wrote down, I can't believe how good this looks. And just every time it happens, I just feel great gratitude that they had the resources and the budget and the time to make things like the part where Moses closes his eye and then that morphs into this sequence of just amazing surreal wall art. Like they didn't have to try this hard, but it's so great that they did. The story is the story. It is what it is. It's the story of Moses and Exodus, but it's told in a very understated and sincere way. Val Kilmer plays Moses naturally. His take on the character is stoic, But like, I guess it's impossible to make Moses an interesting character. The much better performance is Ray Fiennes, who plays Ramses, the Pharaoh, and he's having a lot of fun being the emperor, being the Pharaoh, and ruling the world. But Ray Fiennes has a lot of poignancy. You can tell that he is heartbroken to be losing his brother. He just wants things to go back to the way they were, wants the world to never change. You really feel for Ramses in this movie. Yes, Val Kilmer, Ray Fiennes, these people should not have been playing ancient Egyptians and ancient Hebrews. And while it'd be a problem for DreamWorks to just continue hiring big name stars to play animated characters, and, you know, obviously I'm not expecting a 1998 animated film to have like racial appropriate casting, but it's just extremely jarring to hear these voices and to hear other voices like Jeff Goldblum and Sandra Bullock. Like, these people just sound way too modern to be coming out of these characters. But that is literally my only complaint with the movie. Like, this is an incredible achievement. And maybe I'm making it sound too much like homework to keep saying how gorgeous it is. The movie is gorgeous, but it's also like a really entertaining time. So let me spotlight just one other great sequence, and it's the finale of the movie when Moses crosses the Red Sea, causes it to part, and then they all cross. And, you know, you feel like you've seen this before in the Ten Commandments, and it's been parodied a million times. But here in this movie, the movie makes it look really kind of disturbing and creepy and eerie as they just like walk on the ocean floor and see the towers of water next to them. And you see this amazing whale like silhouette, like the whale looking out and wondering what the fuck is happening right now. And it goes on for a long time. Like, it's not just a quick triumphant jaunt across the sea. It really puts you in there and makes you think how disturbing this would be to experience. This movie was probably never going to be a big hit because it is too serious. There's no animal sidekicks. There's very little comedy. And there are songs, but they're not like the Disney Broadway style songs that were so big at the time. And I'm sure people didn't listen to the soundtrack of this movie on a cassette in their car. But I also think it just being a Bible story made it feel too much like, I don't know, having to go to church for people. Like, it's not quite as fun as The Lion King or anything else. But Jeffrey Katzenberg was desperate for the movie to be a big hit. It was like personal validation for him and the choices he made, you know, to separate from the Pharaoh and to leave Egypt. When Disney announced that it was going to be opening up Bug's Life in the same month as The Prince of Egypt, he knew his movie was in trouble. And you can see my earlier video about the movie Ants, that basically he ordered that movie to get made as a bargaining chip to get Disney to reschedule the release date of A Bug's Life, which did not work. And yes, I'm sure it took some steam away from The Prince of Egypt, but The Prince of Egypt was never going to be a giant blockbuster. But it did stay in theaters long enough for it to cross $100 million so that they could declare victory. This movie has made $100 million. It definitely turned a profit, especially on home video later. But basically, this is like the beginning of the end of the era of hand-drawn animation. And Katzenberg had basically made his name in traditional 2D animation. And meanwhile, DreamWorks had partnered up with this satellite studio, computer-generated imaging animated studio, PDI, Pacific Data Imageworks. They were the studio that did Ants, and Shrek was in development, but he never paid any attention to Shrek until it was clear that like they might have a big hit on their hands. And then suddenly, yeah, the writing's on the wall. 3D is the future, not 2D, which is just sad. So yeah, the Prince of Egypt, an American masterpiece, certainly one of the great animated movies of the 90s, maybe of all time, and certainly one of the most underappreciated. But I don't know what its legacy is otherwise. Did anybody on here grow up watching this movie? What do you remember about it? Do kids like this movie? It is a very serious movie. I don't know that I could see kids watching this, but I'm always wrong about that. Let me know if you like The Prince of Egypt or if you grew up watching it and what you think about it.